it's Shelley here. Welcome to my channel and thank you for joining me today. On today's video, I thought I'd play around with paint pens, specifically the Tooli-art paint pens, and share with you guys a technique I've been trying to play around with and experiment with and see whether it would work for me. As you guys know, I do love the paint pens, the Tooli-art paint pens. I have been playing with them quite a lot in my pages, and I use them mainly for covering up black lines, for creating highlights, and just those little finishing touches at the end of my illustrations. However, I've really enjoyed the Tooli-art paint pens, and for maybe a year now, over the last year, I've been trying to slowly collect the Tooli-art paint pens, slowly because I just, for no other reason other than the fact that I like to spread out my buys, spread out the joy. And so I have now got a few sets. So I've got the Earth set, which is the first one I got. I've got the Pastel set, and I think those are probably the best sets to have for highlights and for covering up black lines at the end of your illustrations. But then I also have the yellows and browns. I have the reds and pinks. I've got the greens and the blues. Those are the two more recent ones I've bought. And yeah, so I think I've got all the Pro Color series, which is the specific series, like, you know, of each color. And I think they still have a gray set. I haven't got that one yet. I don't know if I will. They have a jewel, I think it's called jewel colors or something like that, so deeper colors. And I think there's one very early set which I might not bother getting, but I think the jewel ones looks quite nice, the deep colors, that I quite like those colors. And I'm not so sure about the grey set, whether I actually need it in my colouring, but I'll think about that one. But yeah, I've got these lovely, lovely colours now. And what I have noticed, obviously, and I'm sure a lot of you who use paint pens have also noticed, is for the highlights, for the covering up the black lines at the end of an illustration especially, we tend to use the lighter colors. So the pastel set works really, really well. The earth tone set, most of the colors work, other than the dark ones I barely touch. And then also, because I have the other sets, I think those two sets are sufficient for highlights and for covering up black lines. But because I was enjoying them so much, I decided to just go all out and get all of them. And so I do use the lighter shades in the other sets as well for my highlights and covering up black lines. However, a lot of the dark colors get left unused that much. And I'm not someone who does color by numbers. I know some people who do certain color by number pages, or some of these Disney pages tend to use some, I don't know if it's specifically Tooli-art, but they do use acrylic paint pens or markers to do those kind of pages, but I don't do color by numbers, so it doesn't come in use in, you know, any other time. And so I decided to try and just play around with it and see if I can find a way that I would maybe want to use the darker colors, because they're such beautiful colors. Like, if you look at these colors here, the red set, they're such nice, like that cranberry is absolutely stunning. I really like the plum red, but they're so dark to use. Obviously you wouldn't use them as a highlight color. The greens are really nice, and look at those blues and purples, they're absolutely beautiful. And so obviously they'll remain unused if I'm only using them for highlights. So these are the beautiful pens. I have done a review before, but in case this is the first time you're coming across them, I know a lot of people use Posca, but I found them quite pricey for what I use them for. So I decided to try out the Tooli-arts, and I really liked the fact that the Earth set, I think came in a set of 36, and oh, do I remember how much it was? I think it was like £28 or something, which is pretty decent compared to what you can get with Posca, because they don't give such a big set for that much. So that's why I went for it. And then obviously these colors are absolutely gorgeous. So that's what attracted me to try them. And then when I tried them, I really, really enjoyed them. I found them so beautiful. They are numbered. All right, I'll just show it to you. The pen is like this. They have a little window that you can see your paint in. So obviously when you shake it, you can make sure it looks all nice and blended together. Once before you start using it, you can see how much has been used, whether you're running short, and they flow beautifully. And the most important thing, especially for what I use it for, which is covering up black lines, is they're really opaque, and I haven't had any trouble with their opacity, in that with Posca sometimes I do find that they're not as opaque. I have to go over a few times, but with these Tooli-arts, I find them a lot more opaque from my experience. But maybe it works differently for different people. Like even when you talk about white, you know, white paint pens or white pens, some people like to use the Sakura white jelly roll. Some people use the Uniball white. Some people use Posca. Everyone has a different preference, but I feel like I prefer these to the Posca. And so, yeah, I started using it for that reason. They're beautiful pens, and they work lovely and they flow nicely. And a lot of people ask about the nibs. So do they dry out? So what I tend to do is after I've used a pen, I do tend to run the nib under water, under warmish water, just to at least run, to just make sure that there's no paint left in the nib part itself, so that it doesn't just dry out in there and then block the nib. So I do tend to do that extra step. I know it's a bit frustrating to do that, but I tend to do that just so that I look after them, and I don't have the issue. I haven't had the issue of blocked nibs yet, but that's probably because I wash them out after every use. And yeah, so I keep them in a pencil case like this, and I do store them such that the pens are horizontal. So I do store them horizontally, and yeah, they're beautiful pens. So, and I've just shown you the swatches as well. I'll just put this to the side. It's massive. So like I said, these are the swatches. If you were just interested in pens for highlights and covering black lines, I would say the earth tone and the pastels are absolutely beautiful. The other sets have a lot of darker colors that you won't use for highlights and covering up black lines as much. So you may not want to consider getting those unless you're going to use it in any other way. The other thing I wanted to mention why I like these pens is you can color over them. So some people say they can't color over paint pens very well. I find that I have been able to. I need to use a very light pressure, but it is possible to. Once you let it dry completely, I have in a lot of my pages colored over them, and I've shown examples of that when I'm doing that. So yeah, you can color over them, and I'll show you that today. Hopefully it actually works. So what I've been doing, and I think I recently showed this in my mid-year free cat tag video, I showed this particular whip that I've been working on, and it's this page here. Let me see if I can just zoom you in a little bit. That's better, because it's such a tiny book. Sorry, it is the Art Therapy Animaux de la Forêt. Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce that one with the E with the little hat on it, but Animals of the Forest. And the artist is Caroline Allen. So obviously a French artist, yeah. So I don't know, again, if that's Alan, but there we go. So that's the artist for this particular book, I think. And this is the page I was playing around on. So with regards to the background, I've used my Albrecht Dürer pencils. I've activated them with water, and I've been trying to do the blurry background that Chris Cheng tends to do in a lot of her illustrations. Her work is absolutely beautiful, and she does such beautiful backgrounds. And so I was trying to do that. I don't have the patience for an all pencil background, so I did activate it with water. But I think I got that blurry effect. I don't think the colors are in the right places as such, but I'm happy with it for a first attempt. And then, so that's just the pencils for the background. And then for the foreground, what I decided to start doing is trying to play with my paint pens and see whether I could use the paint pens for basing, so that I could start using some of those dark, beautiful colors that I have in my collection. And so the leaves, the stems, and the flowers, so far I've used paint pen as a base, and then I've gone over with the pencils. So it just gives us another option for basing our work. It eases the amount, reduces the amount of pencils we might need to use, or pencil work we need to do. So it does speed up the process for coloring. It does make it easier with regards to the number of pencils you need to use. And for those of us who may have, you know, issues with our wrists, with our hands, it might help with easing that as well. Just giving us another option of coloring, yet not putting too much pressure on our hands. So there's a few reasons I did it. And then the other reason is that it looks absolutely, I liked the effect it was giving with the painted sort of look. So it still covers up the black lines, which I like doing a lot these days. And at the same time, it just gives a bit of a painted look. So yeah, I showed this in my media freakout tag, and some people had requested to see how I'm using the Tooli-arts for basing. So I thought I'd come on here and just try and share that with you guys quickly. So I did this a week ago. So hopefully it works, but I'll be experimenting again. I'm still learning how to do it myself. So even if it goes wrong, it's absolutely fine. But I'll try and make sure that it goes right so you can actually see how it works. So I'll be using a variety of Tooli-art paint pens. I'll tell you, you might not have all these colors. If you do, I will tell you what colors I'm using. If you don't, the other way you could do is, if you wanted the painted look more than anything and you didn't want to get so many of these paint pens, you could obviously use a white, I think, a white paint pen. Now I haven't tried that because, well, let me just start over. So you can use a white paint pen, you can, or white ink, and you can cover up all the black lines and then color over with pencils. The advantage of using colors is that you start using different colors of paint pens, you get the shading in already from the word go, from the first layer, from the basing layer, rather than just covering it all up with white. So that's the advantage of obviously using colored paint pens, is that you get that basing and then you don't have to use so many pencils. Obviously, you guys know what I'm like, and I still layer loads of pencils, but you don't actually need to do that. But I'll show it to you guys so you can see how you get the shading. And if you're someone who likes the complete painted look without any pencils over the top, you could even leave it without any pencils and you'll have, you know, sort of a painted picture. So you can see that as well. So what I'll do is I am going to do it the way I obviously did this side with pencils as well, to show you that you can use pencils over the paint pens, because a lot of people say that it doesn't work for them. So hopefully it works for me today. It obviously worked on this side. But you know, things go a bit differently when it's on camera. But I'll do the paint pens, I'll let them dry, and then I'll show you how I do blend them onto the paper. Then I'll let them dry, and then I will use the pencils over top so that you can see that the pencils do work. But I'll share the colors with you as well, just in case you do have the paint pens, so that you can follow along. Then the other thing I have is a bit of water on the side, and then this is just a cheap paintbrush. I haven't invested in any expensive paintbrushes because I don't really paint. So it's not worth it for me right now. But basically, it's a size 0. So, and if you have a tiny paintbrush, that's what I'm using. And the reason I'm using such a small one, even though the areas that I'm going to be painting are not that small, the reason I'm using it is because I feel like it picks up less water, because I don't want, when I'm rinsing my brush, obviously it would pick up water. I try and dab it, but it'll still hold a bit of water, and a larger brush holds more water. So I just want very little water. I don't want too much. I don't think that would work. It would dilute the paint too much, which I don't want. But so that's why I'm using the tiny size 0 brush. And then I just have a paper towel, which at the moment is quite messy, but that's okay, because it's just going to get even dirtier. And I have that on the side as well. All right, so hopefully this works. I'm sorry if it doesn't, but I hope it does. Let's see how it goes. And the other thing I have on the side is just a rough piece of paper. I just wrote down quickly what shades I was using, because I was doing this page and I was really enjoying the effect it was giving me. So I decided to keep it aside so that I can share it with you guys. So I quickly noted down what I was using so I didn't forget. But anyways, I was testing it out and I just had that rough paper because you might want to just test your pen before you put it on your paper, your actual coloring paper. Now, what I'll start with is possibly the stem. Hopefully I remember how I actually did it, but I'll start with the stem, and I'm using 3 Tooli-art paint pens from the green set. All of them are from the green set. I have my darkest shade, so just like we choose with pencils, I've gone for 3 shades for this particular element. So I've gone for 14 from the green set. My mid-tone is 18. Whoa, sorry. And then my light tone is 17. Okay, all from the green set. So it's sort of written here at the bottom, greens. Yeah. So yeah, let's get started, and hopefully this works, and hopefully it gives you an idea. If you guys have managed to collect like loads of paint pens, maybe you'll enjoy trying out this technique with me. All right, so I'm going in with my darkest shade first. Now you have to work a little bit fast because these pens, which is an advantage when I'm using them for my embellishments at the end of a page, is they dry really fast. So if I don't talk too much, I'm sorry, but basically I'm going to figure out where I want my darkest shade. So just like when you're coloring, you have the shadow areas and the highlight areas. I'm going to use that same, idea, that same thought process to lay down my paint pen. So that was my dark tone, number 14. This is number 18. And I'm just sort of laying it down next to it. And sorry, I did shake it. So make sure you shake your paint pens, yeah, to make sure that the paint is all mixed up. You can test it on the side that it's flowing well. And one thing I do as well is make sure I cover up those black lines because you want that painted look. And it's a bit hard to talk and do it at the same time, so it might not be quick enough. Then I take my little brush. I have dipped it in water, but I'm dabbing out majority of my water out off the brush, and I just sort of try and blend my, like as if you're painting, just try and blend the paints together. I've just dipped it in water because I want to take off the dark paint I picked up onto it, because I don't want to bring my dark paint into my highlight area. And now I want to sort of blend out my light ones into the dark. There we go. So but we don't have a harsh line. Sorry, I am trying to do it as fast as I can. See? So I'm taking my light into the dark area. I don't want to bring my dark into the light because I want to maintain my highlight area. And you can already see it looks absolutely beautiful, just like this. If you wanted to leave it as a painted look, you don't even need to go in with pencils. And I'm barely using any water, as you can tell, because I'm using such a small brush. That's the reason I use a small brush. I haven't tried it on thin paper like Amazon paper. That's the next thing I want to try. This paper is really good, really thick paper. So I want to try it on Amazon paper because that will be amazing if I can find another way to color on Amazon paper. Yeah, and you just work it out. There we go. Isn't that beautiful already? Let me see what it looks like on camera. Yeah. So you can just see that blend, yeah? You don't want the harsh lines. And then you leave it to dry, all right? And I leave it for a while in that if you start coloring over it when it's still a bit wet, it will peel off the color. So basically the pencils will just scrape off the paint. So you need to wait for it to dry, okay? Now I'm going to show you a leaf while we're waiting for that to dry. So I've got a paint pen from the green set, which is, I've only chosen 2 colors for this bit, and then I go over with the pencils quite a lot. So I've given you an idea of how to use paint pens where you might not even need to go over with pencil if you don't want to, because you've got your dark, your mid-tone, and your light. Now, if you didn't have all the colors, or it's a smaller area that you're, coloring and you can't fit in 3 paint pens, and paint it neatly and all that, then you can use 2 colors and then go over with your pencils. So for the leaves, that's what I've done. I've gone for from the green set 16, which is like a mid-tone, because I'll go in with darker pencils to create my shadows. And then I've got a light tone from the pastel set, which is 6. Okay, and I haven't shook these ones yet, so I'm shaking it up. Now this was a bit harder to do because, like I said, you can't leave it to dry, otherwise you won't be able to blend it on the paper. It will just remain as harsh lines. But you saw how nicely this one was blending, hopefully. So sorry, I'm just shaking it all up. Okay, and then I'm just testing it on the side, make sure it's flowing nicely, and then I'll get started. So what I do with, well, what I did with these particular leaves is I worked in the segments of the leaves. So I did, instead of doing it as one whole leaf, for this particular one, I decided to work in segments since we have those lines there. And so I'll work in segments so that it doesn't dry up. Okay, so I'll start. Sorry, I'm just trying to think how I want to do it. Okay, so this is my mid-tone, green number 16. And I'm going to go over the lines because we're trying to do the painted look. We're using paint pens to try and cover up lines. They are opaque. I've decided to put the dark area on the outside of the leaf, on this side of the leaf. And then I'm going in with my light, which is a pastel number 6. Okay, then I'm taking my paintbrush. I've dipped it in water just to make sure it's clean, dried off the excess water, and then I blend. Now I left a little gap there because I felt that it was sort of blending in together without control when I laid it on top, because they were both still quite wet. So I just left a little gap and I knew that I'd be able to blend it out. Now, the other advantage of using a paintbrush and blending them out is that it flattens out the paint pen, the acrylic paint. So when it flattens out, it is actually easier to work over with pencil. That's what I've noticed. So if you just did, you know, the line, covering up black lines at the end and do highlights, usually I find that's a bit hard. You can still color over it, but it's not as smooth to color over. And so I find it that when I actually blend out or flatten out my paint, then it's easier to color over. So that's another advantage, and that's probably helps with the pencils working over the acrylic paint. So doing the same thing. You can do it rough, but as long as you're quick enough to blend it out, yeah? You see it sort of seeped into each other when I mixed it because they're both still wet. So that's why I leave the little gap there. And then I go in and I blend. Clean my brush. So every time you go into the dark area, I would say clean out your brush if you're going to go back in the light, because you don't want to lose your highlight. You want that contrast to stay even with your paint pens. Now you can see that because I've not used the 3 colors, a dark, a medium and a light, I don't think, for me, this doesn't look finished. So I wouldn't usually leave my work like this. I like the pencil look, whereas here with the really dark, the mid-tone and the light, you could technically leave it like that. And in fact, you could even use a very light paint pen just to give a bit of a highlight on that edge if you really wanted to. So I've sort of done it over here. Haven't neatened it out, but I have sort of done it. So yeah. So that's basically what I do for basing. I'll just do one more segment. And if you work fast enough, like I said, you don't need to cover up the whole area. You just need to lay down a bit of it and then use your brush and blend it together. And that way you're also not using too much paint either, to be honest. It takes you a long way. Once you put it down on the paper and you actually start blending it, it just spreads out, doesn't it? So there we go. And I like to go over also the bit that I'm not blending, so just like I said, to flatten it out so that I know my pencils will work nicely over top, hopefully. I'll just show you what I would have done on this side. So this side I decided to keep the middle darker, so that's how I've done those ones. Obviously I do leaves differently every time, so on this particular page for these particular leaves I decided to do it this way. Sorry, I just have to think for a second. Try and cover up your black lines to help with the painted look. I want my highlight to be on the outside of the leaf now, so I need to cover up with the paint pen. Yep. Take my brush and blend them together. I just cleaned off my brush because I had some of that darker color in it. Then I went into my light area and brought in the light area. So I just sort of play around really. I don't have the theory for the art, you know, the art side of things. I just do what works for me. And that's what I'm showing you. Okay, there we go. Okay, so that's how I'm doing that particular leaf. And then I'll show you the pencil work, okay? All right, now we need that to dry. I don't want to make this video too long because it's going to be the same process for the rest of it. So since it's not a color along, I just thought I'd show you little segments, yeah? Now, this will be dry, yeah, because they dry really fast. That's one advantage. One advantage of paint pens, but also or at least these paint pens work really well like that. But the disadvantage is when you're using it for basing, you have to make sure you're fast, because if it dries and it dries very fast, you won't be able to blend it, yeah? All right, so I've got now I'll show you how to do the petals and how I do the petals on the leaves. And I've got two colors. I've got it from the reds, both are from the red set. I've got a number 16 and I've got a number 22. So sort of a dark color, or it's not too dark that I won't be able to go over it, but it's still a darkish or almost a mid-tone, and then a light, very light, 22. All right. I haven't put all the pens together, like when I say that I mean, so if you see my swatch sheet, I have left them in the sets that they come in, rather than try and figure out a good sequence like I do with my pencils. And the reason for that is they all have, I guess I could renumber them, but they all have numbers on it, and each set starts with the number 1 and goes through. So that one is 1 to 36, but then again the pastel set is 1 to 24, so we have more than one, for example. There are too many pens for me to renumber them. I don't have the time to do that, so I just keep them in separate sets, and I try and compare them and just pick out my midtones and colors like that. Mainly because I only use them for highlights to begin with, but now that I've started doing this, I still don't think I want to reorganize the colors, because I think that's a lot of work, and I'd rather spend that time coloring at the moment. So yeah, maybe not anytime soon. All right, so I've mixed them up. And I'm just going to test it on the side, make sure they're flowing well. Yeah, okay. I didn't clean these particular nibs for a week. Like I told you, every time I finish using pens, I tend to clean the nibs, but this time I hadn't cleaned them straight after using them. And so I was worried that they'd be dried up, but they haven't dried up in the week, so that's good. But I will clean them once I finish this page. All right, so now I'll go in with my dark and my light for the petals. I'm just trying to think which ones to show you. Okay, let's do these ones. Is this in? Yeah, so let's do here. Okay, so I'll start with this one, because then if it's not dry, I can do a couple of the others. So I go in once again with my dark. I know it looks the way the line art is. This is going to be the shadow area. That's going to be the highlight. So I'm going to go in and just lay down my dark try and be as fast as I can. This is going to take me time getting used to it still as well. Hopefully this works because this is a larger area, but you can go over it again as well, just to wet it a bit at the edges if you need to. And then I'm going to go in with my light. I need to cover up the black line because I want that painted look. So I'm just going to outline the line quickly, and then you don't have to be very neat because you're going to blend it out with the paintbrush. So I'm just going over a little bit on this side so I can blend it out. Okay, then I go in with my paintbrush. Even though this is a cheap paintbrush, I don't mind it because the brush tip is not too long, so I have a bit more control over it. So I'm just trying to blend out, and obviously that helps make a mid-tone color as well because you're blending the light and the dark shades together. And with acrylic, you can, like I said, you can color over it, and you can also use a light shade on a dark and it'll show up as light. So if you were to use white on top of this dark pink area, you'd see it as white. So you can actually lighten up an area if it has darkened. So say you lose your highlight a little bit. So see, now that dried up a little bit. You can put down a bit more paint pen and blend it out, especially if you're going to leave it as a painted look without any pencil on top. I would blend it out more. However, because I'm going to go over with the pencils, I don't mind that area being not perfectly blended. Okay, all right, so let's do this again. I'm going to try and be a bit quicker. The petals took me a while to figure out, like, in terms of making sure I was quick enough. Okay, quickly put the light down. Okay, I might just add a little bit to the edge over here. Oops. Okay, and then go in with my paintbrush and try and hopefully blend it. And smooth it out so that I can go over with the pencil. Sorry if I've gone a bit quiet. I'm trying to concentrate and do it fast. As it is, I'm a slow colorist, so I'm not always able to work that fast. So this takes me a bit of concentration, especially also because it's a new technique for me. I don't really do, you know, I've just started trying to do watercolor painting, and obviously acrylic paints are totally different to watercolor paints as well. So it's basically totally a new technique for me. Like I said in that video freak out tag video, I mentioned that this was one of the new techniques I've been trying. And yeah, so you can blend it. And again, like I said, if you want to leave it as a painted look, that's absolutely fine. Maybe you can lay down a little bit more of the paint and blend it out a bit more, and just take your time working on blending it so that it looks like a smooth blend rather than as messy as mine. But I'm going to be going over with my pencil. So there we go. So that's my basing with the paint pens. And I absolutely love this technique. It's nice. It's fun playing around with them in a different way to just covering up black lines and giving highlights and dots and things like that. So it's been nice trying to figure it out like this as well. All right, so I'm just going to give it a minute to dry, get my pencils ready. In the meantime, I'm just going to pull out the pencils I was using on this side, and then I'll show you how I colored over it and see, and hopefully it works, and show you that the pencils work perfect on top of the acrylic paint pens. I'll be right back with my pencils. Okay, so I'm back with my pencils. I'm just going to zoom in a bit more. Maybe I should have before, but hopefully you were able to see that fine. I think these petals look beautiful. If I spent a bit more time blending it, it would be really nice to leave it sort of like that. I feel a lot of our books with florals especially, like Maria Trolle's, maybe Maggie Interios, I would say Layla Dooley's, but I only have the first book of hers, which is really tiny, so I don't, a lot of the line art is quite small, so I don't know how it would work with that. But basically a lot of floral illustrations, it would look really nice with this painted look. Apologize. So yeah, I quite like that. I would spend a bit more time, and you could just leave it like that without any pencil work. Even the stem actually looks really good. So maybe the first time I did the stem, maybe my blending wasn't perfect, so I went in with the pencils. But here, I'm just thinking, I'm not sure my pencils will actually give much more of a different effect because I've got my blended look. But I'll do it the way I did that. Definitely, the colors I've chosen for the leaves, I wouldn't leave it like this. So you could use darker colors if you wanted to leave, you know, have the painted look, just get in one darker shade and blend those together. But definitely that will, for my liking, need more pencil work. But anyways, I'll do it like I did the other one, okay? I haven't got my little swatches out, so what I'll do is I'll just say what I'm using just in case you want to know, but I'll put in the description box below as well. All right. I haven't done my frogs yet because I don't know what color I want them to be yet, so that's why I'm going to color everything else before I do that. That's why I haven't used shown you how to do the paint pens on that. And those are just leaves, so same thing, sort of same technique. And I'm not sure what flowers I'm doing yet. I think I might go for a very pale yellow, which I probably have with paint pens if I decide to do it in paint pens. Like that yellow there is quite nice, isn't it? In the pastel set. So maybe something very light. I don't think I'll be able to figure out how to give a white petal look with the paint pens yet. That's a bit advanced for me. So I'll see. Or I might go for like this really light blue and see if I can make it look like a white petal with sort of really light colors. I'll see. So I'm leaving that to the end as well. I just thought I'd show you the techniques for these because I knew what colors I was using. The rest is going to come later. All right. So let's get started. I'll start with the stem because it's nice and dry, we know that. And I'm going in with my chrome oxide green, which is a dark shade, which I don't think you even need it, but one thing it does do with the pencils is just neaten out over the top of your base, because like I said, I didn't spend too much time blending it, and I don't want to leave a completely painted look. That's the reason I'd go in with my pencils on this particular case, because I've got the dark, medium and light tone. I've got that shading, the shadows, everything. So I don't technically need to go in with pencil, but I want more of a pencil look in a way, if it makes sense. So that's my chrome oxide green. Then I'm going in with a medium tone green, which is chromium green opaque, which is 174. And just blending out, and you can see that it's working. It's not scraping off the paint. I'm not using much pressure at the moment. Sometimes I do in certain elements, but right now basically I'm using a light hand. Then I'm going in with my May green, which is 170. More than giving a shadow and highlight or anything, I'm literally just smoothing out the areas. This is dark indigo, 157, just to darken up my shadows. As you guys know, I like adding that little extra depth to my shadow areas. I want to give a big contrast between shadow and highlight. Even with my whatever I'm doing, I always tend to deepen up my shadows after. So you can see that does help. So again, I could have just left everything exactly the same and just used my darker shadow to deepen up that shadow area and leave the rest with acrylic paint. But I'm showing you how I did it. Now I just want to show you that you can highlight, give a bit of a lighter area if you wanted. So you can just use a bit of ivory, which is 103, and lighten up your acrylic paint that you've applied to give a bit of a highlight if you wanted, okay? And I'm adding, like I tend to do with my pencils, a little bit of brown to my stem, all right? So you can see how many pencils I've used over top of the paint pens, and it's worked. And you can blend them together as well. Light hand, I have not used a dark hand, other than maybe putting the highlight down, the ivory. I didn't really use much pressure. And that's a bit of brown. That's what I do with my pencil work. So I just thought I'd try it with the acrylic just to see whether it would show up on green, and it does. So I've used a brown, which is the Raw Umber 180, over top of the green acrylic, and it works really well. So there we go. So that's our stem. And you saw I didn't have to put much pressure in with my pencils. I didn't need to put too much effort with blending with the pencils because the blending was done with the paint. So that really helps speed up the process. I'll be right back. Sorry guys, I don't know what's going on with my voice today. I was at work yesterday and obviously talking all day, so maybe it's had a toll on my throat. Hopefully I'm not losing my voice. But there we go. So that's our stem. And it looks really nice, even with the pencils over top. You saw how the pencils laid down nicely. I used how many colors? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 colors over top, and it worked. So yeah, it works really well as a base. Now I'll try and do the leaf. This is a bit harder because obviously I've just used 2 colors. So yes, I have to put in a bit more shading. So if you want to reduce the amount of shading you have to do with pencils, I would say obviously try and use more colors with your paint pens. And then, but if you do it like I did this particular leaf, you're going to need to do a bit more layers with pencils to get a good end result. All right. So I'm using my permanent green olive, which is 167. This is my mid-tone green. Yeah, so this is my mid-tone green. I'm just checking what colors I have on the side here. And so I'm working from my shadow areas and just laying down the color like I would if the paint pen wasn't there, but very light layers. There we go. So I'll do the same thing on this one. But you can see that obviously there's not enough shading done or enough layers or enough depth created with my acrylic paint pens yet for the leaves, because I only use those 2 colors and I didn't use a very dark color. Maintain your highlight because you want that contrast. I'm trying to do it fast so this video is not too long because it's going to be repetitive. And here we decided that the shadow area will be in the middle of the leaf at the main vein, and then blend out, and the highlight will be on the outside of the leaf. Okay, yes, it changes the texture of the paper, the paint pen, so it gives a rougher texture to color on, so you will see that your pencils crumb a bit more. Now I don't know how it works with softer pencils. I don't own anything like what do you call it, Prismacolors, so I wouldn't know how it's going to work with very soft pencils. So someone will have to try it out and let me know. All right, this is Chromium Green Opaque 174. Just because it's a darker shade, I'm just doing it in the shadow areas. I'm trying to be really fast. Still a light hand. All right, then I'm doing a light tone, which is earth green yellowish, which is 168. You will need a brush, like I said, because the paper is rougher when you put the paint pen on it, so you get more dust, pencil dust created. Yeah. But again, I'm using very light pressure, so those of you who do struggle with your wrists, with your hands, it does help as another option of layering. basing, so that you don't have to put too much pressure on your hands, but yet you can use your pencils because you're using them so lightly. You don't need to put much pressure, so it does help ease that pressure you need to put on your wrists and your hands when you're coloring. This is Ivory 103. I'm just blending out that earth green yellowish a bit so that it's a smoother finish into my highlight areas, because I'm using such light pressure, it wasn't blended in well. So there we go. So we're blending it in nicely. Hopefully what I'm saying makes sense. Like I said, I'm not an artist. I'm just figuring out things as I go along, trying to play around, enjoy my coloring. So I'm just showing you what I've been doing. Then I'm going in with a very dark green, chrome oxide green, to now start deepening up my shadow areas like I like to. Obviously, you guys can do as many layers as you want to do, but you guys know me, I do tend to use quite a few layers. There we go. We'll need to blend this out a bit as well. But let me just lay it down first. Again, I'm not using much pressure at all. I'm just literally just placing the color, like literally just very lightly. And then I'm using a very, very dark color, Payne's Grey, to deepen up my shadows even more. Okay, and then I'm going to use, what shall I use? I'm going to use my Chromium Green Opaque 174 just to smooth out. Now I do want to show you something. Oh, I don't know if you can see it on camera. Let me just finish this. So I'm just smoothing it out like I would pencils. Obviously the number of layers you can put down is a lot less than if you were just on paper. So you can't put as many layers, and that's why you have to also use a light hand, because you're just going to scrape off the paint, or it's just going to start sliding over the paint basically. So very light layers. Maybe you don't have to do too many layers if you don't want to, like I just did. You could have gone in with just a dark shade, a medium and a light if you wanted in this case. There we go. All right, and then, so how does that look? I'm just standing up to have a look. Yeah, and then I also added a little bit of green gold, which is 268, to give a little bit of brown areas to my leaf. And you can see that it works over the green of the paint, the green paint pens you've placed. So there we go. Yeah, just a little hints of it in some areas. There we go. What do you guys think? That looks nice. That's transformed, isn't it? Because the two colors I chose, yes, was basically for basing, but I didn't blend it out as much as the stem, so I did need to put a bit more color, and you can see why I needed to do that. I think I would deepen up my shadows a bit more, but maybe I shouldn't waste your time. But I just, with my Payne's Grey 181. But yeah, you get the gist, right? All right. Now the petals, okay? Hopefully this works. So I'm going to use 133, which is magenta. So magenta 133, which is like a medium tone. I have a light here. I've got a white and then a darker red violet, okay? So what I do is, if I remember correctly, yeah, I just went in from my shadow, again, very lightly. Don't need to do much because we've already got a pink shade down there covering up the whites of the paper. Yeah, just laying down the color. Didn't cover up the black line very well there, or is that because that's part of the frog? But you can just, right at the end, you could still use your paint pens again just to bring back some highlight spots if you needed to, okay? So that's not a problem. All right, and then same thing here, just to show you it works. And what you'll notice as you're coloring over paint pens is that the areas that you've managed to smooth out or blend well with your paintbrush will be easier to color over than areas where you might have missed. It'll be a bit more bumpy, it'll be harder to color over, and that's why I'm saying that using the paint pen does help. Use pencils over top. So it does help to just flatten out your acrylic paint pen on the paper before you go in with pencil, even if you weren't using them to shadow. So say you wanted to just put a base down of one acrylic color. So say I went for the light pink and I just based the whole petal, I would try and flatten it out with my paintbrush, even though I don't need to blend it with a different color. Even if I just used one color, I'd flatten it out with the paintbrush. And I think I used that technique in my color along in Hannah Carlson's Tales from the Witch's Cottage. I used them for the flowers. So you can always check that video out. Right at the end, I think after I'd done my pencil work, I used my paint pens. I put down a little bit of color, not even on the whole petal. I just put down a little bit of color like at the base of the petal, and I used my paintbrush to sort of flatten it out and pull the color up to the top. So again, it gave a bit of a gradient of that particular one color paint pen I used, and then I colored over, you know, in my shadow areas with a pencil just to create a bit more depth. So you can even do that if you wanted, rather than using more than one color to base. Yeah, but this was just giving an idea that you can put down shading already without with the paint pens to reduce how much effort you need to put with your pencils. So now I'm going over with Red Violet 194, which is the darker shade. And again, still going quite lightly. But you can see that the color is deepening in the shadow areas. Yeah. And then my light pink, which is going to be light purple pink, 128. And again, light-handed, so I'm just blending out from my mid-tone, which was the magenta, out into the light acrylic pink that I'd used. And I'm not bringing it all the way to the edge, so I'm going to leave the highlights as the acrylic paint because it's a nice color. So there we go. So you don't have to cover up all of the paint either. You can use it as your light tone, which is what I did in that Hannah Carlson's Tales from the Witch's Cottage color along. I used it as a light shade and then sort of just brought out a bit of shadows and left the highlight areas as the paint pen, just like you would with markers. If you were using alcohol markers or water-based markers, you can use them as a base, but yet use a highlight color so that it can be the highlight shade. Yeah, there we go. So when I'm coming into the highlight area of the light shade of the paint pen right at the edge, to leave that highlight, I'm just even going lighter with my pencil. So I've got a light pressure already with the pencil, but I'm becoming even lighter until it's barely touching the paper so that it blends out into your paint pen highlight color. Yeah, you don't want that abrupt change. So to do that, you just literally reduce the pressure on the pencil even more until you're barely touching the paper, so it sort of gives that good blending out or fading effect into that highlight area. How is that, guys? I would be really interested to know what you guys think about this. I'm actually quite excited that I can use my darker shades of paint pens now. I want to try and see if I can use it on paper like the Amazon paper, but what I expect to find is that I can't blend out the paint pens as much because it's thin paper. There's a chance that it will just tear through. So maybe the blending process of it on the paper will be a bit harder. All right, then I'm going to use deepen up my shadows even more with Payne's Grey 181. That's me. So just in my darkest shadows to give that big contrast so it pops a bit more. There we go. But you can see how many layers I've put down, and it's working on the paint pens. It just takes some time getting used to it and practicing so that you get a feel of how the pencils work on the paint. And once you get that feel, you yourself will figure out how much pressure you can put or how many layers you can put. And you just have to play around and not worry about going wrong. Like, I just chose this page and decided, let me go for it. I hadn't even tested it. I just said, okay, let me go for it. Let me try and see what happens. And I actually quite enjoyed it. And I'm really happy I'm getting a chance. You know, I have the channel and I can share it with you guys as well. I don't know if anyone else uses the paint pens like this. So yeah, there we go. And then if you want to put a bit more highlight, which I don't think I need to because I haven't lost my highlight area of the paint pen, but if you did, just to show you how a light color like a white goes over a painted a different color, you can just put down a bit of highlight and it just lightens up and lifts up that highlight area. See, you can just blend out your light shade of pencil that you put, so it gives a good transition. Here again, and just blends it all out. There we go. And that is how I did it. So I think it has given a bit more depth using the pencils, but it still looked nice as just the paints. So it's up to you. Everyone has a different, you know, view on things, and they like how things finish in a different way. I like pencil work, and that's why I obviously always try to figure out how I could use my pencils over any basing, and that's why I did that. But like I said, if you use enough paint pen colors, if you have them, if you're trying to figure out how to use them, like on the stem I did the dark, medium and light tone, it worked really well, and I could have literally just left it like that if I wanted, and that stem was done, so it was really quick. But I've also shown you how you can deepen up your paint pen work with pencils. I've shown you that the pencils work over the paint pens really well. So for those of you who have in the past asked me, my paint pens, you know, my pencils are not working over the paint pens, I've tried and it's just not working. It does work, but maybe try and make sure you flatten out your paint pen. If you want to do a lot of pencil work on it, make sure you smooth it out so that it's not bumpy, it's not you know, rough, and you can color over it quite nicely. So yeah, there we go, guys. That's my new technique that I was playing with, and I'm so happy that I got to share it with you guys. I hope you enjoyed watching it, and if you guys test this out, let me know what you found about it. How was your experience when you try something the first time? It's not always going to work. Like, I think there was one petal here I was trying to do and it didn't really work because the paint dried up really quickly, and I wasn't able to blend it properly, and then I went over with the pencils, but it still ended up working because I was able to cover it up. And I think something like that about one of these segments I did on the leaves. So it's just a matter of playing, not worrying that things go wrong. You have so many pages that you can, you know, so many books we can color in, so many pages yet to get to. So don't worry if it just takes a bit of practice to get a hold of a new technique you're trying. So yeah. There we go. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Hopefully it was useful. If you guys have collected paint pens like I have recently, hopefully you'll get another idea of how to use those colors that you're not touching at all. All right, guys, I'll leave you to it. I will finish this off camera in my own time, and I'll be back with you guys soon again with another video. So until then, take care. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye-bye.